the one and only Bill Cunningham.
Billy Cunningham, the great American, of course, one of the great congressmen anywhere in this great nation of ours is Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Been there about 12 consecutive years. He made a rather dramatic announcement about 3 or 4 days ago that he will not seek re-election to another term as U.S. House of Representatives. And if you've listened to me for a while, Brad comes on quite often. He's on the Ways and Means Committee. He's on the Intelligence Committee. He's chair of a subcommittee looking into the origins of COVID-19. But most importantly, Politico and others have said he's one of the top 10 U.S. congressmen from either party. Of the 435, he's in the top 10 because of his influence and his committee assignments, ability to walk across the aisle and deal with Democrats at times, and he's well respected. So it's sad to lose people like this. He's got one more year to serve. And Congressman Brad Wenstrup, welcome, I think, for one of the final times as a congressman to the Bill Cunningham Show. And can you tell the American people why you decided to make this at this point? You announced it, I think, on Thursday, 3 or 4 days ago. And why are you leaving Congress at the end of your term?
Yeah, first of all, we've got 14 more months to go, and I plan to run through the tape because we've got a lot to do, and I hope to get a lot of things done when it comes to dealing with the pandemic and how we deal with one in the future, as well as how we can make America a healthier nation, not just have a health care policy, but actually be a healthy nation and continue to work on national security. And I think at the end of this term, there'll be opportunities out there to continue to stay in the game, not necessarily in an elected position. So we'll see what comes our way. But a lot of that had to do with family. I've got young kids and I miss them. And so that's a big part of it. And you know, Congress is hectic. We know that going in. When I started 12 years ago, I didn't have any kids. And now I have 2, and I want to make sure that I'm there because I think one of the most important things that we can do in America is be good parents. And sometimes fathers aren't present as much as they should be. And my kids want me around, and I want to be there. And, you know, I was reminded a while back by one of my surgeon mentors that I was taught by as a physician. And he said, you don't have to be someone somewhere else as long as you're somebody at home. And I've always believed in God, family, and country in that order, and I'll continue to work on all 3.
As far as the typical life of a U.S. congressman, many, many years ago, before you took office, I met with Congressman, at that point, Congressman Rob Portman, and I had sights of maybe running for that seat. And he said, before you do it, I want to meet with you. I said, Rob, I'd love to meet with you. And I met with him, and I said, he said, let me show you my schedule. I said, okay, let me see your schedule. He left on an early flight on Monday morning and was in Washington by about 10 a.m., 11 a.m. on Monday. If he had something going on early Monday, he left on Sunday. And he stayed there until Thursday night on Friday. He showed me his schedule in Washington. He was on 4 committees. He showed me the appointments he had coming up the next week. He showed me the presentations, the speeches. And the worst part about the job, he said, was cold calling people to get money. That as a relatively new U.S. congressman, I had to go into a soundproof booth, gave me a list of people to call and shake them down legally, of course, for money. And then he showed me when I got back on Thursday night or Friday, I had at that particular weekend 17 appearances on Friday, Saturday, and part of Sunday. Do you run a similar schedule?
Pretty much, except that I have to say I've been in a position one way or another that I actually have fundraising teams that do most of that work. I mean, I will have events and I will have meetings and this and that, but I don't do a lot of the phone calling. It's kind of set up and we seek it in other ways. So I've been fortunate. It's not that way in necessarily every district, but we've been able to work it that way. But otherwise, yes. One time I wore a Fitbit and I was doing between 13 and 18,000 steps a day in the Capitol, just going from one committee to the next. So you get a pretty good idea. It's not a desk job, that's for sure. Although you do spend other hours, you know, at your desk doing a lot of work. And it's been enjoyable work. There's no doubt about it. I'm not leaving bitter or anything like that. I know democracy can be very messy. I think it's messier right now than it has been in the past. But that doesn't mean we can't get things done You cited those other articles. I think that sometimes when you do things, you get them done quietly. You're not necessarily on TV talking about them. And I think that as a doctor and as a veteran, you can bring a lot more to the table on issues involving health and military. And that's where we get things done, sometimes bipartisan with other doctors and other veterans. And so I think that had something to do. But if you take a common sense approach to a lot of things and you work on being persuasive rather than bombastic, you can really get things done. And I have a Reagan quote on my desk that said, "There's no limit to what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit."
Yep, no question. You're one of the top 10, maybe in the top 5 or 6. You're up there in my book with Congressman Jim Jordan and people like that I have great respect for. You've been called a doctor for about 30, 35 years. You've been called a colonel, recently promoted. You were in the military 25 years, and now a congressman, but for about 12 years. So you're a doctor, a colonel, a congressman, but the most important thing you can be called is dad or honey.
That's right.
From your wife. Correct?
Yeah, there's that too. I want to keep that one going for sure. But yeah, it's true, and it's music to my ears when I hear the kids, call me dad. I got married late, didn't know if I'd ever hear that, so I'm thrilled to have it. And there was a time when the kids weren't going to school yet, where we drove back and forth every week too, to add to that. But the kids were good in the car. They watched Andy Griffith, and they know that show. So we're trying to do things best we can, Willie.
What are you going to do? Because you're still a relatively young man. Are you going to back into practice? You're retired from the military as a colonel. You're retired as a congressman. Are you going to be a doctor?
I'll always be a doctor in some way, shape, or form. We'll see. I don't know if it'll be full-time practice like before. But at the same time, I think that there'll be avenues to be engaged in the health arena as well as the national security arena. And at the same time, I think there's going to be some things that you can do locally, philanthropically, or just making good connections for people. Because I think there's a lot of things you can do if you don't wait for Washington. We can do it better privately than if Washington tries to do it.
All right, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, let's get on to some of the issues on Friday. All hell could break loose again. It appears that the proposals of Speaker of the House Johnson to break this thing up into 2 parts. A part of it would be valid until January, then part would be February. He doesn't want to tie everything together. The $106 billion, which is credit card debt on top of the credit card debt. What's going to happen between now and Friday? Is there going to be another government shutdown?
Well, when nobody runs the shutdown, I can tell you that. But what we want to do is put things in place to start with better process than we've seen over the last several years. What we don't want to see is a bill at the end of the year that's a huge garbage pail where everything gets thrown into it and it gets passed. And usually it's an increase in spending. And so we want to pace this out. We've been actually working in our committees in the House, not so much in the Senate, but in the House, to go ahead and come up with our appropriations bills, our actual spending bills, where we actually say this is where we want to spend money. And so what's being proposed is to extend government funding in 2 steps, go with about 4 appropriations bills that will extend to January 19th. And then the remaining 8 bills extend until February 2nd. That doesn't mean we haven't done these things in the House and aren't close to completing them all, but understand that when we get it done in the House, then it has to go to the Senate, or the Senate has to bring theirs to the table, and we go to conference, and then it goes to the president. So we're buying time, and, we also have a bill in place, so if we get into January, there's an automatic 1% cut. At the same time, we're going to make sure that we can adequately fund our military and can engage with some of the situations we have going on around the world. But a 1% cut on most other areas would be just fine with me, because we have a lot of unnecessary spending. The bottom line is we have to get back to a process where we are really acting like a business, like CEOs, and getting together and deciding how we're going to spend our money and address our debt. It is one of our greatest risks. The trajectory is unsustainable. Moody's has put the U.S. credit rating on a downgrade watch. It's a negative outlook for the U.S. credit rating, and we've got to do better in managing our country. And at some point, we also have to address mandatory spending. Those are the things that are programs that money just goes out the door without us ever looking at it, and they're taking over the pie. So in addition to borrowing money, what we actually have keeps getting squanched as far as the discretionary spending, which is what those appropriations bills are. But at the same time, when you put a program in place and you put it in perpetuity, you've got to go back and look and see if it's working and can it be sustainable. You have to look at numbers. You have to look at how many people pay into the tax-paying system, all of these types of things. What does the next generation look like? That's what actuaries do with insurance companies. That's what we have to do as a nation.
Are you shocked what's happening since October the 7th about the Hamas chapters on most U.S. college campuses? 100,000 marched in New York City, 150,000 marched over the weekend in London. Are you shocked at the blatant anti-Semitism you're seeing everywhere as if it's mainstreamed?
I am. We knew we had problems on our campuses without a doubt. But for people to be so one-sided, they have so much hatred, and be able to completely ignore what Hamas did when they went into innocent civilians in Israel. And I don't think we've seen anything like that in this world since the Holocaust, to be honest with you, as far as brutal, terrible behavior where you totally disregard someone's life down to children, the atrocities that were committed on them. And these groups seem to be able to just ignore that. Right. And now we hear a call for a ceasefire, Bill. Well, there was a ceasefire. Yeah. But Hamas negated it. Hamas went right in. And just took down innocent people, took no prisoners, if you will, except for some, and they're still held hostage. And no one seems to want to comment on that. I've been for a two-state solution for some time. Right. But you know what? This is interesting, Bill. We were cleaning the house, and a picture frame came open in the back, and there was old newspaper in there from 1994, Cincinnati Enquirer. The sports section was kind of fun because we had just won opening day. This is April of 94. Kevin Mitchell hit a home run. Anyway, but if you looked at this, I went to page 2 of the front page, and it was the Israeli soldiers leaving Gaza. There was an article about them leaving Gaza, and they're being attacked. And they're being attacked by the youth who are throwing rocks at them and chanting, "We don't want peace." Because the reporter, I don't know if it was an AP reporter, they were like, "Well, why are you doing this?" They're leaving. They're leaving so there can be peace. And we don't want peace. This is the youth. Well, now what are they, 40 years old? Right. Now you know who they are. So this seems to be something taught. It seems to be within that particular group. There is no chance of peace. They don't want peace. It's death or nothing else for Jews right now. And, Israel has the right to defend itself, and they should, and we're going to help them as best we can. The House has passed a bill to fund them, and we also paid for it in our time. We took some money from the IRS to be able to actually, that was already appropriated by Democrats. We took some of that money to pay for, from the IRS to pay for the funding for Israel to defend itself. Yeah,
and I would say this, that in this country, I don't think things have been this bad since 1968. With all the riots in 1968, the political assassinations, what happened in Chicago, and here we are in 2023. And something got screwed up 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe it was because of the George Floyd riots. They weren't protests, they were riots in which cops were killed, a couple $1 billion of value taken out of cities, complete collapse of law and order. Whatever it was, George Soros, the Marxists, whatever it is, things have been completely screwed up. And now it just seems like riots, protests, knocking on the doors of the White House, bloody hands all over the building from pro-Hamas demonstrators, Lafayette statue vandalized. It's happening in many major cities. I see the swastika put on NYPD police cars over the weekend in order to, I guess, frighten the Jews. just massive lawlessness is happening everywhere. Everywhere I look, I see nothing but crisis. You're in the belly of the beast. Is there a belief and an apprehension in Washington, Congressman, that we are living in very perilous times when it comes to spending by this country, the two wars in Europe and in the Middle East? You have a complete breakdown of law and order on the southern border. I saw on one of the morning shows today that there's a school district in Texas near the border that has to have Narcan available because they've had several overdoses, they think unwittingly, of grade school kids. That the prevalence of heroin, Percocet, and fentanyl is so ubiquitous that Narcan is being handed out to 7- and 8-year-olds to their parents in case they inadvertently take fentanyl or purposely take Percocet if you're in high school. There is something wrong in this country right now. We need people like you to stick around, Brad Wenstrup. I understand why you're leaving, but nonetheless, is there a sense among Republicans and Democrats in Washington that we are in trouble?
Yeah, there is a huge sense of it, I could say so, within the Republican Party. I think in the Democrat Party, they understand it. Matter of fact, I think more and more of them really want to do something about the border, and especially when you start talking about fentanyl, there are many over there. China's the other threat that, we haven't even really talked about in this conversation, but we have many times, and it's a big part of the problem. I'll still be in the fight, but I want to make sure my kids know what America is really founded on.
Yes.
And what we have been.
Yes.
And hopefully, this seems like more than just a little bit of a pendulum swing. It is much greater than that.
Terrible.
And we have to address that, and people have to start understanding that America is being self-destructed and also being destructed, and it's happening on many fronts.
Suicide.
And we have to continue to go after that. But I don't think people are growing up with the right education on many fronts.
No, they don't know what.
And that has been the problem when we've let it happen. And you know what? This is the greatest country that's ever existed. But you have to continue to live by the same principles, morals, values, and virtues that we have had for over 200 years. And when we start letting those go, then we have a problem. And if you're going to disrespect the democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, and be okay with them being slaughtered, and support those that are slaughtering them, this is a sickness, and it's a culture of death that is out there on many fronts.
All right, thank you, and we'll talk again later this year and next, but congratulations. Brad Wenstrup, doctor, colonel, congressman, father, and a husband coming back home in about a year. Brad Wenstrup, once again, thank you for coming on the Bill Cunningham Show. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.